As the leading admissions management system and CRM for over 700 of the world's top international and independent schools, Open Apply supports every step of the applicant and family journey, from discovery through to inquiry, admissions, and enrollment.
We want to share a free recording of our recent webinar on managing transitions, in which our guest, Laura Schupfer, former director of the Community Relations and head of admissions at the International School of Zug and Lucerne, joined us in exploring how to make transitions easier for students, parents, and staff. You can access this recording by visiting the link bit.ly/OA transitions, pronounced bit.ly/OA transitions.
Looking beyond transitions at the wider admissions journey, we would like to invite you to register for our upcoming webinar on professionalizing admissions. If you'd like to maximize efficiency and user experience while promptly and proactively meeting the demands of your admissions and marketing team, as well as the high expectation of families and parents, join us on December the 13th at 9 a.m. GMT, that's London time, by registering the link bit.ly/OA admissions. That's bit.ly/OA admissions.
Last but not least, if you'd like to find out where your school's admissions process ranks compared to best practice schools and receive free recommendations on any areas for improvement, we highly recommend you check out our free new admissions benchmarking tool by visiting bit.ly/OA benchmark, pronounced bit.ly/OA benchmark.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. I'm delighted to be here with my co-host, John Mixon. How are you doing, John?
Great, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, really nice to be back online and looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually, right after this podcast finishes, I've got to drive up to Poland. We're taking our dog to stay with the dog grandparents while when we go to Asia for 3 months. So
that's a great title, dog grandparents. That's like
yeah,
a new,
they love having the dog actually. So
that's
it works
awesome.
out well. But today we're delighted to be talking to Chip Kimball. And Chip is a director of the International School of Prague, the incoming director. We're recording this in September 2022, and he started quite recently. So Chip, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and great to see both of you again, Dan and John. Really excited about having a conversation with you.
And now we'd like to say a few words from our valued partner and sponsor, Faria Education Group. Faria Education Group has been with you through thick and thin, helping international schools minimize headaches and easing transitions. Whether through paperless admissions with Open Apply, curriculum-first learning with ManageBack, or school-to-home management with Schools Buddy, Faria has been your partner.
What's more, Faria has been expanding with additional services, including professional development for international school educators. Mini PD is a professional learning platform by practitioners for practitioners. With a global community of learners and coaches, Mini PD makes the learning experience more personal, flexible, and equitable. Looking for a PD solution for your school or something for yourself? Sign up for individualized coaching and enjoy a 10% discount using the code ISPodcast. Head over to app.minipd.com. That's app.minipd.com to book your personal learning coach today. Mini PD, embracing the learner in every educator.
Sounds good. Well, Chip, obviously we've met a couple of times in person. This is like the international world we all live in. You know, I've met Chip in Prague. John, you've met Chip in Singapore and Luxembourg. So all over the world, different places. But yeah, great to have a chat. John, do you want to kick things off from your side?
Yeah, Chip, maybe what would be really helpful is just maybe share a bit your bio, your journey, just a short kind of synopsis so people have a kind of point of reference as we delve into some of the topics that we were going to explore together.
Sure, great. And you know what is a little bit interesting about my bio is that I've taken a non-traditional route through leadership. I started very traditionally as a science teacher, a high school science teacher in public schools in the state of California in the US. And in my second year of teaching, I was really disturbed by how many kids we were losing. And so a colleague and I invented an interdisciplinary English biology curriculum that we wanted to do, that was project-based, that was field-based, that received a lot of pushback from my colleagues, but a lot of support from school leadership. And the subsequent year, we wrote a grant to Apple Computer to get technology that would support this curriculum. And we were one of 20 school systems in the country, in the US, that received these grants. And of course, this was at the very beginning of technology emerging in education. And shortly after that, I became the only person in the school with any technology expertise, because I was the only person with any technology. And so I quickly became dubbed the technology coordinator, and was asked to design the wide area network, the local area network, the library automation system, the video distribution system, all of these systems. And by year 6, I was doing this full time as a technology director, and then was given lots of responsibility early on. So by the subsequent year, was asked to coordinate technology in 144 schools in 101 districts across the state of California. And 2 years after that, was offered the first chief technology officer position in Lake Washington School District in Washington State, where Microsoft is located, and was responsible for 30,000 students in that system. And I was really thinking about leadership and how do you make an impact on teaching and learning while doing it through the lens of technology and information systems. And I spent 16 years in that school district as a CTO, and then I took on assessment, and then I took on communications, and then I took on a region of schools where I supervised a third of the school district, then became deputy superintendent, and then subsequently superintendent in that school system. And then in 2012, I was asked to become the superintendent at Singapore American School, large American curriculum school based in Singapore, 4,000 students. Did that job through 2019. And then, as Dan suggested, in 2021, about a year ago, just over a year ago, started as the director at the International School of Prague. So I've seen lots of different contexts, lots of interesting leadership opportunities, both from a school reform perspective and a technology perspective and a curriculum perspective, and also from an international education perspective. So it's been a very, very interesting journey.
What's interesting, Chip, I think, which is maybe unusual, is often people that end up in your position of leadership as a superintendent in international schools, usually the narrative or the road they take is through being an educator, a principal, assistant principal, curriculum director. And often IT directors are not seen as viable candidates for those positions. And I personally think that's absolutely wrong, because I think if anybody, IT directors usually have a K-12 perspective. They're strategically thinking all school, they're systems oriented, they tend to deal with big budgets. But I think many boards and search committees often find that navigate, and they prefer to deal with a pedagogue. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and one that I've been asked a lot. At the time that I became the superintendent in Lake Washington, I was one of 2 superintendents in the US that had come through the technology pathway rather than through the curriculum and instruction pathway. And so the question is, are there deficits or advantages of one or the other? And then the other question is, how do you make up for, or at least build some credibility around those other areas where, for example, I have not been a principal, and yet I supervised and led principals for the better part of 20 years. And so I think part of it is that technology, really good technology directors and technology leaders are typically systems thinkers.
Yep.
And great school work is about systems thinking. Secondly, is they do need to know how to lead and manage and incentivize people. It's the people business, because even in the technology space, if you can't lead your team well, then you are not going to be able to get your initiatives accomplished. And then thirdly, it is about the management of projects and budgets and the trade-offs that go with any given space. And in today's world, much of school leadership is about change leadership and change management. And
Yep.
there's no better place to cut your teeth on change management, change leadership than their technology in education. And so I learned an amazing amount about leadership and leading of people and systems and others through that lens. And then the other part of it, which is, okay, but what do you know about literacy in third grade? Well, you listen a lot, you learn a lot, you rely upon the expertise of great educators. You figure out who you're going to empower, who will you listen to, what do you delegate, and what do you own in terms of the pedagogical approach to education. So when you talk to my faculty here at ISP or people that I've worked with in Singapore or in Lake Washington, and ask the question, so does Chip know education? Does he know teaching and learning? And they'll say, absolutely he does. Well, how? Yes, I was a teacher, but I was a teacher 30 plus years ago. More importantly, I listen and I learn and I empower, and we get the conversations going, because great leadership is as much about asking good questions and understanding the context upon which you are leading as it is about content expertise.
Chip, I have a question. That's very interesting. We have a lot of tech directors listen to this podcast at international schools. Probably that was a kind of a base. That's what we started off talking about. What advice would you have to any tech directors that are thinking, I'd like to get into school leadership? Anything you can say, how they should prepare themselves, what would be a stepping stone role, or just anything generally? Because I know John and me know a lot of people who this is on their mind of, do I want to stay in this, or do I actually want to try to get school leadership? And like you said, there's some obstacles in terms of search committees' opinions.
Yeah. So, often tech leaders will think about, where do I need to go, or what do I need to do in order to get to that next place of leadership, and specifically around school leadership? And the first piece of advice I would say is, you've got to do the work where you're at. And so that means you need to be somebody who can understand and speak to teachers. When you are in the room, are you talking about bits and bytes and technology apps, or is the first thing that's coming out of your mouth a conversation about teaching and learning? How is it impacting the learning experience for a student? How can I empower a teacher to be their best selves in the classroom through the things that I'm giving? So the first is, do it where you are, and do it through the lens of teaching and learning and empowering the educator. The second is get a seat at the table. So I often talk with heads of school about their organizational structures. And in every organization that I've been in the last 25 years, the CTO or CIO, however it happens to be framed, has been a member of the directors or the superintendent's senior leadership team or cabinet. So get a seat at the table. Say, yes, I can manage the network and I can program a switch, but I also can talk about the best professional learning for a teacher so that they can impact that third grade student with an app that we're discovering. Get a seat at the table. Thirdly is, you have to be overtly ambitious about volunteering for things that are outside of your scope of work. So assessment, as an example, there's this really nice correlation that the entryway, if you will, into assessment is data. So, well, I'm a tech person, I know data, I know the systems for data, so why don't you let me own the assessment agenda? And so you're looking for avenues. Communication is another one, because much of communication is digital. So look for those opportunities where you have a door opener to get into a broader scope of work. And once you demonstrate that you are a systems thinker, you're all about learning, that you know how to work with people, and you can lead well in a change-rich environment, all of a sudden they see you as a leader, not just a tech leader.
Fantastic. That's some gold dust there. I think we'll edit some of these comments and publish them. They're great.
Yeah.
You talked about listening, and you were referring to third grade literacy, and you were saying that one of the challenges or perspective is people would think that you would not know enough, and then you have said, and your anecdotes of other people that have worked with you have always said, yes, he knows about learning and teaching, but the key point I think you talked about was this idea of distributive leadership, where you're
Mhm.
willing to let the experts have the spotlight, but you're listening to understand. And by listening to understand, you're also building up your own capacity to navigate and understand those terms. Maybe talk a bit about, how you went about with some of that distributive leadership, because I think that's often, when you're in a position of power, you have to let go of some control in some ways. You have to be comfortable not
Sure.
knowing. And, Renee Brown has her book and everybody's talking about vulnerability, but the reality is sometimes much harder than what is said in the book. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many things there that are great. And I love Brene Brown, of course, because she's doing wonderful work on the psychological side of things. Some of my other organizational heroes are Patrick Lencioni, who wrote the Five Dysfunctions of Team. He wrote The Ideal Team Player. He wrote some of those works. Daniel Pink is one of my favorites. Uh, so there's a number out there. In education circles, educational institutions tend to be unbelievably flat. It's either teaching or administration, and middle level leadership is often lacking inside of educational institutions. And so everywhere I have had the opportunity, I did it really well. I think I learned a lot in Lake Washington. I think I did it really well in Singapore, and we have an emerging agenda in Prague around what we call middle level leadership, and that is you create systems and structures whereby you are empowering faculty leadership in order to lead. And what is often talked about is almost a bad word, is the notion of power. And John, you mentioned this power distribution. There's a great book called Power by Jeffrey Pfeiffer from Stanford University. And when I was doing some of my business courses at Stanford, he was one of my professors. And he talks very frankly about power. And the leader's responsibility is to distribute power in ways that are going to make the biggest impact on the institution. And so I'm constantly managing power in the institution. So a faculty member will be either empowered or disempowered by me when I either bless what they are doing, encourage them. Maybe it could be as simple as a public acknowledgement, or as frankly not very well done as a very subtle slight of somebody. And keeping in mind that educational institutions, in addition to being extraordinarily flat, they are also extraordinarily emotionally sensitive. And so if you dismiss somebody, purposely or not purposely, you are actually managing a power relationship in that dismissal of another person, or you empower them. And so I work very hard at figuring out who are my players, who can lead well, and it's not by title or by position, but by influence inside the system. And you empower those people to lead. In one case, both in Singapore and now some of the work that we're doing here, this was through these R&D projects where you are tapping people on the shoulder, say, we're going to go look at different schools, we're going to find the best practices, and I want you to bring back a set of recommendations. It's about empowering them that my job is to figure out how to get to yes. My job is not to keep putting obstacles in your way. And the more I do that, the more they're going to feel empowered, and the more the system is going to move forward. Because I'm not the expert on third grade literacy, but I am the expert on figuring out who is the expert on third grade literacy and empowering them and build a system that will support them.
That's great. Yeah, and I think,
Fantastic.
that process is so important and I think so often overlooked. And I really like the way you describe the idea that you're not the expert on third grade literacy, but you're the expert on who is, and you know how to give them that power and give them the amplification so they can move. You talk about these systems. So, if you talk about yourself, you are a person enabling that change and that distributive leadership. Are there systems that could be into a school that when you move on to another professional opportunity, that
Yeah. So, John, I'm going to need to have you repeat that. You cut out a little bit.
Yeah. John, maybe turn off the video. It might be better. I'm not sure if it's a bandwidth issue.
okay.
Oh, looks like John's gone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Right. So, you talk about yeah.
Hi, John. Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm on stop camera. Okay, I'm back in. Yeah. When I turn
We'll
on
edit this part out.
camera, I'm kicked out of the room.
Okay, leave it on.
Anyway, so you talk about, you as a leader giving that distributive.
Yeah, John, you keep cutting out. Sorry, every second or third word is cutting out. So,
I did, Dan. I think I got
I'm
the
gonna go.
essence.
Hold
of
on.
yeah.
Switch and
Yeah.
go to my desktop. Yeah, I'll come.
Yep.
Yeah, carry on, Chip. Sorry, I think
So I
we still got to switch to distributed leadership.
Yeah, I think the essence of his question was when I might move on to another position or another opportunity, how do I ensure that there are systems in place that will essentially encourage the continuation of this leadership that has been established, and that actually is a systems question. The goal of any great leader is to have the system be functioning so that after they depart, the system will continue to function in that way.
Yeah.
And so I think one way that I think about that is what I call leadership redundancy. And what I mean by leadership redundancy is the values of leadership, things like collaboration, things like good listening skills, things like high levels of trust, things like our values around what we're about as an institution. Those particular values are redundant inside of the system, which is really an issue of culture. So great leadership work, such that it does not disappear when the leader disappears, is all about building an institutional culture, organizational culture that contains those leadership values and leadership strategies such that it will continue long after you're gone. And again, culture work is the hardest work, and it's the most nuanced, and it is found in both the strategies of the leader as well as the behaviors of the leader. And that's one of the things that young leaders often underestimate is how closely leaders are watched. They are watching everything you say and do, who you say it to, and how you say it. And I've had people roll into my office and who said, "Oh, I was really afraid walking in, and this was so relieving because I felt heard. We brainstormed some good ideas, etc." And often young leaders underestimate just the position of power that they have, even if they don't exhibit as people who are who leverage that power. It's still very, very important that they are constantly pushing the values down into the system. We listen, we respect one another, we talk about stuff. Everyone has a voice at the table. Those are the kinds of things that we're after, knowing that at the end of the day, I have to make hard decisions sometimes, and I have to make decisions people won't like. But the thing that I am after is that when I make these hard decisions, people will say, I may not agree with the decision, but I understand why he made the decision. And when things get ugly inside the system, where the rumor mill goes off the rails, which it does sometimes happen, that a person will hear something that is not true, and they'll say, "Huh, that actually isn't the character of the person that I know. I'm not sure that that's true." That's what I'm after.
And that's a huge commitment because you're on constantly. If you think as a leader,
Yeah,
as you said, and that really requires almost discipline in some ways, because I think it sounds like young leaders are, if they're not aware of that, if that's not on their radar, then it's almost a discipline. It's a kind of a discipline that you have to practice and work at and constantly be mindful and self-reflective of.
right. That's right. And one of the leadership challenges I've discovered in many international schools, as opposed to U.S. domestic schools or large international schools, the smaller the school, the more the school is run by relationship rather than run by systems. And
Right.
and management by relationship is a beautiful thing. So I don't want to dismiss it, but it can be extraordinarily unequitable, and it is not sustainable because it is built entirely on the personality of the leader. And when you are managing by relationship, it becomes very hard to be fair,
Yeah.
and that
If
creates
you have a chosen one, you have a chosen one of the monarch, then you have a great relationship. No.
yeah, that's right. And so I work really hard at trying to lead by systems. We create ethos through relationship. So we create a culture of care through relationship, but the decision making is done through systems.
And that Chip, so I have that's I love what you're saying, because that has been something I've always been challenged, especially having been an IT director for many years, is where relationships dictate the platforms or the work processes or how things are done. And when that person leaves, suddenly you have this huge gap and there's not really a clear transition or sharing of
Right.
skills and things like that. I would say, and I'm going to be provocative here, that most school leaders tend to veer towards the relationship over the systems. Why?
I think it is partly because of how we hire and how we promote through the system. So when we hire teachers because they are great at building relationships with kids. Because we know that if you don't build good relationships with kids first, the likelihood of you being effective in the classroom is minimized quite dramatically. And so teachers build these high affect, high relational skills, which are beautiful. Well, we often promote teachers into administrative roles, and then the administrator leads very similarly, and then they go up through the system in that way, rather than really honing in how do you lead an organization. Leading a school, leading a school district, leading a school system is a different type of leadership challenge than leading in a classroom. And so I think that's part of the challenge. Is sometimes I think that we are looking at the wrong thing when we're trying. Now, at the end of the day, great leaders in education have to have both. You can't be a great systems leader without great relational skills and do well in school. The math just doesn't work. In business, that might actually be possible, but I might argue that that's bad business practice as well. But in schools, there's just no way you can get away with it. But what happens in business by contract is they will default towards having the MBA that's great on the number side and maybe light on the relational side. And if they have to default, they're going to default on the MBA side. Schools tend to default the other way. Great on relationships. They should be great at strategy, but if we're going to default on the relational side. In reality, you really need both. And sometimes we just default too often on the relational side. And as a result of that, we find schools are places that often are afraid to tell the truth and to be vulnerable for fear of hurting people's feelings. And it is actually, in my mind, cruel and unethical to not tell the truth to try and spare one's feelings, rather than telling the truth and being honest and doing it in a way that is surrounded in care and surrounded in respect, and in many cases surrounded in love. But you cannot stop telling the truth, and schools too often aren't telling the truth.
That's fascinating. So, John, you're back now. Sorry. Yeah, Chip. I was something you said a bit earlier. I was just kept thinking about, like you mentioned about how schools normally have a very flat management structure, which is and I'm interested because I think on the face of it, people wouldn't think that, because you've obviously got teachers, and then you'll have, a lot of middle school management positions, and then above that. So it seems like there is quite a lot of levels. Do you mean that just the ones in the middle don't always have much control or say? It's really done at the top or at the teaching level.
No, I think what I'm really referring to is teacher leadership.
Right,
So,
got it. Yep.
and I think the more we can figure out how to empower teacher leadership to really take on those leadership roles, the better.
Got it. Great.
Yep.
So, Chip, one of the things that you have done in Singapore American School, there's actually a video that you shared with us, and you've done a lot of work about significantly shifting a school culture. So many competitive schools tend to want to produce grades, because grades is a measure. Most parents, when they look at school and the school experience, their point of reference is their own experience, which tends to be more non-personalized learning, exam driven. The grades is what gets you to the good universities. And I know I've had the privilege of getting to know some of that work through the video and talking to Tim and Patrick. And you really try to do something what I would consider quite radical, in the sense of really looking at personalized learning. And you have the anecdote of your biology and English teacher really looking at the transdisciplinary skills and looking at the personal project kind of thing. Maybe talk to us a bit about when you're trying to change a big institution like a school to something that is so different from the point of reference that many stakeholders have. What are some of the things that you had to do, or what are some of the things you would guide people to say, you need to think about these things before?
That's a great question. So I think first and foremost is that often school reform people, whether it's a business person or a parent or an educator, are looking for a model. And there are not good models in education. There are good exemplars. And there's a difference. And the difference is that every school community has its own characteristics. It has its own set of values. It has its own culture, et cetera. So how I was leading in California is different than how I was leading in Washington State, which is different than how I was leading in Singapore, which is different than how I'm leading in Prague. Because I had to understand the culture that I was leading within, understand what the aspirations were for what we were hoping to achieve, and then trying to build a pathway to get there within our culture. The organizational culture, the culture of the city, country, whatever, in order to do that. So the advice that I give, and some of the things that I take into consideration, is first and foremost, be very clear about who you are and who you want to become. The who do I want to become was different in Singapore than it is in Prague. There's a different set of value. The currency of success actually looks differently. The second is that if you go too radical too fast in any given context, it's going to blow up on you, and you're just not going to be successful. Sure. And so even on my team here right now, again, we're still early days in this system, but the kinds of things that we're trying here look very different than if we were a startup charter school in the Midwest of the United States or in the bowels of South Africa. We are an established IB or IB-like school in Central Europe that has a university-bound aspiration, right? That is different than being a startup charter school in another part of the world. So I think part of it is about being very clear about that. Then once you understand who you are and who you want to become, it's figuring out who is your team so that you can build a critical mass of educators who are going to help you get there. If you do not have a critical mass, and that does not, by the way, mean consensus, it does not mean 100%, it means a critical mass of your people to bring along with you and can see it and be excited about it and be passionate about it and understand how to both communicate it and execute it. It's bringing them along, then you have a chance at actually getting from point A to point B, knowing that point A to point B is different in Singapore than it is in Prague. Yeah.
So
No,
I
I was
think, go
sorry.
ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, Chip, I'm interested to see what your opinion, but do you think a lot of international schools have too narrow a focus on IB results and which universities children can get into? I'm just thinking it's very interesting. If I look at now a lot of because we know a lot of international school leaders, if you look on LinkedIn, the end of the year, all the promotion is about the universities the students got into. And obviously, if you look at a lot of international school websites, I've noticed it becoming more focused on that. Do you think there's a general point of not taking a holistic enough approach? Do you think it's an issue, like taking a general worldview about this?
Yeah. So, of course, it's an issue, and it always has been an issue, and always will be an issue. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to look underneath. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because the advertising, if you will, around their results is the currency that they use in order to attract customers, fee-paying parents who have aspirations for that for their kid.
Yep.
Most fee-paying parents don't actually believe that their kid is going to go to Harvard, Yale, Cambridge, Oxford, but they want their kid in a system that is capable of it should their kid have that capabilities.
Yeah.
Those capabilities. And so, if I've got a kiddo who is maybe a kid who may struggle academically, I don't believe that my kid is going to get a 45 on the IB, but I want to know that the school is capable of delivering a 45 should my kid actually have those capabilities. So it's the currency on IB, and then advertising it. It actually gives you permission to do the other stuff that you know is important, the project-based learning and the service and those other things. So scores are an indicator that we have to pay attention to, and they do actually give us permission to do the other parts in the educational experience that we think is really, really important. It is naive to believe until universities change their game, till universities change how they admit kids, it is naive to believe that we can just throw out IB or throw out AP or throw out the SATs until the universities are changing. And in the meantime, that's the game we have to play. Frankly, we have to do it.
So you have to do it. So the question is, as you're trying to do that, so I'm just going to imagine I'm an IB teacher teaching physics, and I've got a bunch of 11th and 12th graders, and there's a lot of pressure to pump through content and really deliver on a very tight schedule. But at the same time, you're a leader, hypothetical leader, and you're saying, hold on, that's good, but I also want to focus on personalized learning, student agency. How can you balance both? Or are there certain moments, certain grade groups or certain age groups where it makes more sense to focus on maybe more the non-traditional grade and then flipping between the two? Or can they live together at the same time?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And maybe naively so, or aspirationally so, believe that they can coexist, and that coexistence. And I happen to be a fan of the IB, even though this is my first IB school that I've led. And the reason I'm a fan of the IB is the IB makes attempts at doing what you just described, and they do it through CAST, they do it through theory of knowledge, they do it through service learning, they do it through the interdisciplinary themes that are emerged, they do it through how you should be teaching the IB, which is through themes and principles of how the world works that are bigger than just content. The difficulty is that The DP courses in particular are driven by university professors who dictate what it is they think kids should know and be able to do in order to be admissible in order to university. That's where the rub comes. So how do we manage that? Well, we manage that by trying to build into the units and build into those courses experiences that are more interdisciplinary and are bigger than just the content itself. And I do think that the two can coexist. For us as a school, we have said as a statement, we are not interested in just being a pretty good or better than average IB school. We're interested in being the most inspiring, life-changing, effective, progressive IB school in Europe. Progressive IB school in Europe. We want to be bigger. And for us, that goes back to our values, which is we want to inspire, engage, and empower learners so that they are curious, competent, compassionate change makers. That's the lens through which we look everything, including an IB Chem class, a DP Chem class that has a lot of content that they got to cover. We keep doing it through that lens. It's imperfect. It is ever changing. It's driven by universities. It's hard, but I think it's achievable.
Chip, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. John, do you have any final questions? That was very inspiring, actually, John. Anything else you want? I know we're almost at the top of the hour.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Chip, because I think so often that's the creative tension that leaders face is, they have their heart in something that they want to be really change makers, progressive, and really engage people in new thinking. But that pressure from the universities, which at the end of the day, school leaders can't control. I mean, you can go and visit all the admissions people you want, but really, I think it's much more difficult. So that was really nice to kind of hear how, and really encouraging to say, no, you can do both, because I think so often people feel you can't, but I think it's a lot of work, and your words really are very inspiring.
It's interesting. I think we could do easily a whole episode on how the university system is broken. You mentioned the admissions issue. I think there's so many issues with the focus of students to prepare for universities, and how universities haven't really changed their model in hundreds of years, And I think that's much too big a topic to get into now, but maybe we could have another roundtable discussion about that. It might be very interesting.
Yep. Love to chat with that. There's some really good work going on with the Master Transcript Consortium and others that are really trying to challenge the status quo in universities. And at the end of the day, our parents, they believe, and appropriately so, that the university pathway is the pathway to a big life for their children, and they want what's best for their kids. And our teachers also wants what's best for their kids, and they want our kids to have a bigger life than just university admission, because they get it. And I guess the last thing I'd like to share on your podcast is how incredibly proud I am of teachers who are in the trenches working with kids every day, doing the very best they can to make sure that they do have these content skills, that they do have these aptitudes, while at the same time developing them into these beautiful people that requires great adult influencers in their lives. So, hats off to teachers for the work that you do. And we will make the world a better place through what our kids do as a result of being with us. It's a huge responsibility and a huge privilege to lead.
Yeah, thank you for that shout out to all the educators, Chip. That's really so true.
Exactly. Great way to finish. Thanks very much, Chip. John, until we next speak, thanks very much. Chip, thanks again. It's been a real pleasure to have you on.
Good to see you again, John.
A real pleasure. Take